This morning, we're continuing to follow a deadly mass shooting out of New York. Police say 10 people are dead after a teenager opened fire in a Buffalo supermarket.
Around 2:30 in the afternoon,
possible active shooter at the top. There are still shots being fired.
At a place where we feel safe.
Put as many cars as you possibly can.
The deadliest mass shooting in Buffalo history.
This was pure evil.
Inspired by white supremacy, authorities say the shooter drove here from his home 3.5 hours away in Broome County. Police say he drove up to the Tops Market on Jefferson Avenue armed with a semi-automatic rifle and wearing body armor.
He exited his vehicle. He was very heavily armed. He had tactical gear. He had a tactical helmet on. He had a camera that he was live streaming what he was doing.
After shooting 4 in the parking lot, killing 3, police say he entered the supermarket. In all, 9 were shot inside, the total death toll rising to 10 before patrol officers arrived on scene and convinced the suspect to put down his gun and surrender. While motives are often elusive this early in an investigation, the Erie County Sheriff said that is not the case here.
It was straight up racially motivated hate crime.
Investigators are reviewing the live stream of the attack and a racist manifesto published online. Sources say he etched the N-word into one of his weapons.
Let me ask you something. You see how easily they arrested this man? An armed shooter was arrested without any incident. He had no ill will towards any other white people. This is a very clear indication that Black men need to understand the significance of participating and securing our own community. How is that manhood we leaving ourselves vulnerable to outside people to come into our community and prey on us? This is not new to Black people in America. I have to ask, does Black people suffer from battered women syndrome? I have to ask us that because it seems that way.
Tulsa race riots has been in the news recently. President Joe Biden paid a visit to the city and called out the atrocities that took place there, destroying what is referred to as Black Wall Street. But there are also other Black cities that were destroyed that are less famous than Tulsa. During the Tulsa race massacres, white mobs attacked Black residents and destroyed homes and businesses of the Greenwood district, which was home to the wealthiest Black community in America. The mob burned and destroyed more than 35 square blocks of the neighborhood, and more than 10,000 Black residents were left homeless. So now let's get to our top 5 list of other neighborhoods that were destroyed. Number 1, Seneca Village, where Central Park is located today in New York City. Did you know before Central Park was created, there was the tiny village of Seneca, where 2/3 of the population was Black? This neighborhood was one of the few African-American enclaves at the time where a lot of the residents were homeowners. Seneca Village began in 1825 when landowners in the area began selling some of their land. A 25-year-old Black shoe shiner by the name of Andrew Williams bought the first 3 lots for $125. By the early 1930s, approximately 10 homes were built. Although slavery was abolished in the state of New York in 1827, African Americans still faced discrimination throughout New York City. Seneca Village offered them a place to be homeowners and live away from the hustle and bustle of the densely populated downtown area. By 1855, nearly half of the residents in the village owned their own homes, which meant that gave some Black men who were homeowners the right to vote. The state of New York at the time required Black men to own at least $250 in property and hold residencies for at least 3 years to be able to vote. In 1853, the New York State Legislature enacted a law that set aside 775 acres of land in Manhattan to create the country's first major landscaped public park. That meant the city was now able to acquire the land where Seneca Village was located through eminent domain, the law that allows the government to take private land for public use with compensation paid to the landowner. Landowners were compensated, but many argue that the land was undervalued. Residents had to leave their village by the end of 1857. It is believed that most of the residents relocated to other African American communities in the area as their safe haven was no longer in existence.
Be clear, Black people, The battering, the mass murder of Black people is an ongoing process. It is a continuation. Buffalo, New York is just a continuation of something that has been ongoing in America. I'm wondering, do Black men and women have battered women syndrome? Because it is clear that we need to take up self-defense and we need to surround ourselves with our own kind of people and be able to defend those groups of people. Trying to distinguish which European is racist and which European is not is a waste of time and energy. We need to surround ourselves with like-minded Black people in the community of Black people who wants to see Black people prosper, and then we need to set up security ourselves of that own community. If your daughter was in a battered relationship, would you continue to support and promote her to stay in that battered relationship? Or would you suggest that she get a divorce? We done been through slavery here. We done been through the mass murders of people in various communities. We've been through economic roadblocks placed by this government that we pay taxes to. Why do we try to continue to force ourselves to be a part of something that continuously rejects us, continuously stomps on us? I don't have battered women syndrome. You don't want me around. You don't want to deal with me. I don't want to deal with you. I just need my people to wake up and understand that we can be self-sufficient and we can create a better nation of people without these. They're not going to do right by you. They're going to continue to try to harm, slaughter your people. Why do you want to consistently leave your children vulnerable to that?
Number 2, Rosewood, Florida. Rosewood is a community in Levy County, Florida, where a Black community once presided. In 1923, white men from nearby towns lynched a Black Rosewood resident because of false accusations that a white woman in a nearby town of Sumner had been assaulted by a Black drifter. When Black residents of Rosewood attempted to defend themselves against further attacks, a mob of hundreds of white men went through the countryside hunting for Black residents. They burned down almost every structure in the town. Survivors hid in nearby swamps for days until they were evacuated to other towns. Many were helped by local white residents who hid them in their homes until they were able to be evacuated. White general store owner John Wright and wife Mary Jo hid several survivors. The town of Rosewood was abandoned and the residents never returned. Decades later, survivors and their descendants organized to sue the state for failing to protect Rosewood's Black community. In 1993, Florida compensated survivors and their descendants for damages incurred during the incident. Number 3, East St. Louis.
What I want you to understand is it took to 1993 for them people to get a morsel of compensation, and none of that was equivalent to what they lost or the time that money would have accumulated. It does not add up to none of that, nor does it add up to how they disrupted those people's lives for generations after that. And look how long it takes for the state to take accountability for what wrongs happened to Black people. They're not going to protect you. This is what Black people got to understand. White people are not going to protect you. The police are not going to protect your communities. So those of you who think you are better than everybody else and you moved among white people, guess what? You're going to be the first they're going to get. You're going to be the very first they get because you're next door to them. Believe that. When you think you did something, moving out the hood, getting away from your own people, guess what? All you did was make your children more vulnerable. You made them stand out, stick out like a sore thumb, and they get targeted more and more. If you watch the videos about police harassing Black youth, it's in mostly white neighborhoods. And it's those Blacks who thought they did something by moving out of our community because they don't want to invest in our community. They think the grass is greener in the other side of the yard. they think that white people ice is colder. So they feel they have to move into white communities. And what they say is, well, I can't stay in this community because this community don't have that. This community don't have grocery stores. That's why you need to be investing in your communities. These Negroes have battered women syndrome. Blacks need to form their own community, own economics, circulate money within their own community. This is what you need to do. Create your own security, policing your own community. Unless you just think that your people are criminals and your people is stupid and your people are incapable of building a nation, then I wouldn't be amongst other Black people. But if you believe that you are capable of building your own nation, as we have shown previous times in the future, in the past, we have shown previous times that we can build communities, right? And white people was angry at the success of our communities and went into our communities and burnt them down. So I have no doubt in our mind that we can build prosperous, economically prosperous Black communities separate from these Europeans, because we did it repeatedly. But a lot of you niggas is scared. A lot of you Negroes is scared to unite because of all the time they done went in our communities and burnt them down. So this is why you Negroes is scared now. They beat you Negroes into submission.
Between May and July 1917, a series of race and labor-related riots broke out in East St. Louis in Illinois. During these riots, white mobs killed between 40 and 250 African Americans and left 6,000 homeless by destroying the whole Black neighborhood of the city. Racial tensions had been brewing in the city for a long time, but the worst part of the riots was triggered when a Black Ford Model T occupied by white males drove through a Black area of the city and fired several shots into a group on the street. When a similar car returned to the area an hour later, Black residents, believing the car was occupied by the original attackers, shot at the car, killing a police officer. The next day, a white mob rushed into the Black part of town and started shooting and beating Black people on the street indiscriminately, including women and children. The rioters burned down neighborhoods and shot down those who were running away from the fires. A good number of Black residents left the city permanently. At the end of July 1917, 10,000 African Americans marched in silent protest in New York City to condemn the riots in what is referred to today as the Silent Parade. Number 4, Ocoee, Florida. On November 2nd, 1920, Election Day, a white mob terrorized a Black resident of northern Ocoee, Florida over the right to vote. For a full year before Election Day, several Black organizations were conducting voter registration drives across Florida and in Ocoee. One of the men working on the voter drive was a wealthy Black farmer by the name of Mose Norman. When Norman showed up to vote, he was harassed and run off by white mobs twice. When they showed up at Norman's friend's house to arrest him, the friend, Julius Perry, attempted to drive away the mob that was trying to break into his house with gunshots. 2 white men were killed and 1 wounded. A much bigger mob then marched on the whole Black community, destroying homes and businesses. They later killed Julius Perry and hanged his body from a light post in Orlando. Other Blacks living in southern Ocoee either left on their own after the riots or were driven out over the next 4 years, turning Ocoee into an all-white town. And number 5, Wilmington, North Carolina. By 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina was a thriving town with a majority Black population. This led to there being elected Black officials, which forced white residents to share governing power. This didn't sit well with the white population, which feared Black rule. By the 1989 election, Black men were prevented from voting. In an insurrection, Black elected officials were pushed out along with opposing white officials. But that wasn't enough. A white mob hell-bent on destroying the economic power the Black community built terrorized Wilmington. They destroyed property and businesses of Black residents that were built up since the Civil War. The coup was looked at as a success for white business elite in the city. A prominent lawyer told the Charlotte Observer at the time that the businessmen of the state were largely responsible for the victory. By the end of the massacre, between 60 and 300 Black residents were killed. More than 2,000 Blacks left Wilmington permanently, abandoning their businesses and property. These are just 5 Black towns besides Tulsa that were destroyed. And there are a lot more than 5. Another reason why reparations are needed for African Americans.
Let's be clear, these people have a violent nature, they have a violent history, and it's always been mostly targeted at us, Black people. So unless you have battered women syndrome, why do you want to continue to be a part of this country? I'm not saying leave here physically. I'm saying separate first mentally, right? Second, economically, start to circulate the money back in your community. Whenever possible, you find a Black business and you support that. Third, you start to pull together your resources with other Black people and you all start to build the businesses in your community that is lacking. You pull together the people in your community who don't own your homes and y'all start a group together and you put that $40, $50 aside and you build up and you start to purchase the homes in your community. We have to take ownership of our own community. These Europeans is going to do whatever they can to hinder our progress, and they're going to pull in every other nationality of people to aid them in oppressing Black people. I don't know why y'all fail to understand this when they consistently have shown you this with their actions. White insecurity causes death amongst Black people. So the only way you can survive in America is if you accept being less than them. Because they can't handle you just being you. They can't take it. The insecurity comes out and they willing to go and go on a suicide mission. And they willing to go on a suicide mission to kill us, throw away their life because they feel that they don't measure up to us.